Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to Health and Safety Management, managing health and safety at workplace. Today being the week 3 and the date being the 8th of September 2024, we're going to look at risk assessment. The topic for discussion is risk assessment when it comes to health and safety. Okay, viewers would come to terms with the essence of risk assessment. Then we'll be reminded of the employer's duty, then that of employee's duty, but that we'll deal with at the end, towards the end. Viewers would appreciate the types of risk, then familiarize with the 5-step practical approach of risk assessment. Make do with the 7 steps. That's quite more an approach that is used in some organizations. Then they will learn to design a grid for risk assessment, associate with risk formula and terminologies, acknowledge the fault tree, and then maybe some control measures. All right, it's going to be quite interesting, and we're going to be using very simplistic terminologies in going through these discussions. So we'll go straight into it and look at then what then is risk assessment. Risk itself is the likelihood of harm occurring. Assessment is an examination. So risk assessment simply means what? Examining harm that is likely to take place at workplace. All right. So what will be some of the essence? One, it will be to identify and minimize harm that could occur at workplace. 2, put in the appropriate measures to protect those who interact with the workplace and the machinery and everything at the workplace. So 3, those who learn risk assessment could even apply it to their respective homes, though that's not what we're studying, but they have the advantage of having to know and apply it in their respective homes for their own safety. Then the 4th one is going to be how to ensure that you stay within the legal regime of health and safety of the nation as a corporate entity or small to medium or medium to large organization. Then it would also improve the brand image, because most companies or most people who interact with the organization or hear of the organization would associate it with what? High level of safety or welfare in the organization. All right. It has its another advantage as what? Having to improve profitability, because there's less risk and there's higher productivity. All right. So that's the essence of studying this program. The other bit, when we say risk assessment, risk means the likelihood of harm occurring. If it's likelihood, then mathematically, risk is represented as what? Risk is equal to what? Likelihood times severity. Okay, let's take it carefully. Risk is what? Likelihood of harm occurring. If that be the case, then you would have to multiply likelihood times severity, and severity, that's n is times. So then if you do that you put numbers to it, that's quantitative. It means that you can appreciate whether that event or item or gas or liquid has the propensity to cause some harm. So would you attend to that, or you let it go? Will it be tolerable, or that's accepted risk, or you unaccepted risk or unacceptable risk? So you have to what? Find mitigating measures, minimize the risk towards the barest minimum that will be accepted, and so then that is risk assessment. All right. So now we've gotten to that point. It means that we have identified a couple of words. That is what? Minimization of risk, to make it acceptable or tolerable, or if it's unacceptable, you put in control measures. Then we have to go into it. How do you go about it? The types of risk. We have the preliminary risk assessment. Preliminary risk means that you just walk, you the health and safety manager or supervisor, you walk through the workplace, maybe with the departmental head or the one who is on the job, and then ask questions. What are the risks? You take your pen or paper, you identify the risk. Just watching and taking notes to see the complexity of the hazards that you would have to attend to in assessment. Just that simplistic one, that is what preliminary. So you're not going to do anything that's elaborate, no, just simplistic. All right. Then we have the qualitative risk assessment. When we talk of qualitative risk assessment, we mean that what? Whilst you're walking around, that's another time, whilst you're walking around with the one who is doing the job or the supervisor, you take note of all the risks. You identify which one can cause harm. You indicate it, but this also on a small scale, so it's also subjective because it's just something that you just chatting around and noting. Then we have the semi-quantitative. Semi-quantitative is a little objective than the subjective way. Subjective means that it's just descriptive. You think, you are not too sure. But objective means that you are very certain about what you're talking about, or high identification, high probability that what you are saying is factual, because you have put a certain number to it. That's quantitative. That's objectivity. Objectivity is more towards the facts. Subjectivity is just your gut feeling and stuff like that. It's emotional drives, gut feelings and stuff. Okay, so then we can then go to what we call the semi-quantitative. The semi-quantitative means that, yeah, you're taking notes, but on a small scale. You try to take note, identify all the risk, and put some numbers to it. Some numbers, say 0 to 5 or 1 to 5. If you say the risk is 0, it means that there's no risk. And in life, there's nothing like no risk, 0 risk. In life, there is nothing like 0 risk. Every activity is risky. Even if you want to eat or you are eating, it's risky. It can choke you to death. Water, you can take water and to choke you to death. So every activity has some level of risk, but it's tolerable. That's why we eat and we drink water. Okay, so then you take note. That's the semi-quantitative. So it's on the small scale at the workplace. If it's 5 or more people, you have to make notes of it, write it down. So then if you want an elaborate one, you invite a health and safety expert from outside, more often than an assessor, more often than not an assessor, who comes as a consultant to do that for the workplace in conjunction with the health and safety manager, the in-house health and safety manager, and then the job holder. You walk around, you take notes, they produce a grade. So we're going to go into a grade. You look at, say, dust, for an instance. You see on the board, on the screen, say dust. Dust causes what? Lung problems. Smoking causes all sorts of cancers. See? Noise. 80 decibels and more tells you that noise is too noisy. And so what will you do to bring it down so that people don't have damaged ears? The workers don't have damaged ears. What about the vapor? Chemical vapor. Are you going to inhale the chemicals, or are you going to work from a glass window and then you have it sealed as a glass, then your hands are in a rubber gloves, and then you do the chemical preparation, all that stuff, that you don't inhale the fumes to harm you? Okay, so those are also other measures that you look at. Vibration. If you're using handheld equipment that vibrate the body, handheld equipment, especially if it's electrical, you're using it, or the electric hammer, which you use in concrete, you hit the ground, so it vibrates the whole body. So how would you minimize it? Those are issues that you have to look at. So that's the hazards that we identify. Then you explain what it is. They do that in a grid form. In a grid is, as you see on the screen, is a grid. The square, or rectangle shape. Okay. Then the manual handling. Manual handling, that's musculoskeletal, the whole muscles and all that stuff. How you bend, twist your shoulder, head, your neck pains and back pains and all that. Whatever activity you are doing, are you lifting the right way? Are you just lifting the wrong way, or is it been arranged so that you would have to lift in the wrong way? Those are issues that you look at. Then we have poor lighting. If you work in a place where the lighting is very poor, it could affect your sight. It could even affect the productivity level, accuracy. So those who poor sight, those who work on these attenuations, sound, and then they are watching the sound or on the screen, who are always on the screen watching the screen. Yeah, those also, it helps a lot. If the lighting on the screen is not so bright, that's the small display screens are not so bright. Especially those aerospatial workers watching everything on the screen for long hours, you have to know it has a problem with the eyes, newsreaders and co. So newsreaders, news anchors in the newsroom, they also are exposed to some risks. That's why you find a lot of them put on glasses, not sunglasses, but they have lenses for their eyes. I mean, with time, they tend to have lenses. Okay. So then we have extreme temperatures, very cold or very high temperatures. If it's very cold temperatures, people are not able to work anymore unless they are heaters. If it's very warm, trust yourself, people just won't be able to work. They would have to dive into pools and stuff like that. So those are some of the issues that comes with the grid. Okay, once we've done the grid, we have to look at what? The risk assessment. I talked of quantitative. Come back. Let's take a break and then come back, please.
It's Codex Beats. Check.
They say 9 time, he dey sleep. She be young woman, he no go fit. They say they.
Yeah, we just welcome back, and then we're looking at risk assessment for health and safety management. Okay, we looked at the types of risk, and I said the types of risk we have: qualitative risk, preliminary risk, qualitative risk, quantitative, and then quantitative risks. Okay, those are just ways of looking at it in terms of risk assessment. Okay, the quantitative assessment, qualitative assessment, semi-qualitative, and then preliminary. All right, then let's go to the 5-step approach. How would you do it? How would you carry out the risk itself when you want to assess it? Assessment is a measurement, so it means that, like the preliminary risk assessment, you walk around. Yeah, you could go with the risk assessment manager to go around, and then with the workers or the worker, the job holder, and have a chart, and then they asking where are the hazards, which ones are dangerous, slip and falls, and stuff like that. Okay, so then we go to the 5-step approach. Take note, 5-step approach is a UK standard of risk and safety. That's a 5-step practical approach to risk, measuring risk assessment or conducting a risk assessment. Okay, first you have to identify. That's the first step. Identify the hazards. Work, chart, and ask, and the job holder must be there because they know the job better. They know the risks that's involved and what the lapses are. If not, you do your risk, and then there will still be lapses. There will be so much residual hazards that you may not be able to control, and you would have failed. So make sure the job holder is there whilst you're doing this risk assessment. You identify. Help them to identify. Okay. Then you go for. After that, you decide which has the potential or which can cause harm. That's the second stage. You have to identify. You identify, then you, the risk assessor, you know which can cause harm. And even the job holder knows, most likely, unless the person is new to the job. And the third one is you evaluate the risk. Is it high risk? Is it moderate risk? Is it low risk? We get into another level. High risk, moderate risk, low risk. So then take note, I've mentioned those. Okay, then you go for the 4th stage. That is what? You written records. You assess all the written records, because any organization that has 5 or more workers must have a risk assessment manual that all accidents and near accidents must be recorded, so you can evaluate that in addition to what you have inspected. Okay. Then you review the whole assessment process, whether it is up on top of it or otherwise. Then if it's not up on top, you make sure it is on top. Those are issues. There's some organizations use the 7-step approach. And the 7-step approach is also quite laborious, but it's quite simplistic. First, you'd have to what? You have to generate an inventory. Normally, the 7-step approach, practical steps approach to risk assessment, they generate this inventory of all sources of hazards, all the sources of hazards, like I've mentioned. Okay, then the second part is they then identify all the hazards and the sources. So you identify it, the forklift moving, and then there are no yellow markings, warnings as to how it should go, where it should go, and where people can cross, zebra crossing and stuff like that. Okay, then the third one is going to rate the risk between 1 and 5 or 0 and 5. 5 is catastrophic. 0 is what? Impossible. Or 5 is what? Certainty. Certainty of it happening. That's either the severity of it happening or certainty. Okay. Then 4, you determine if the risk is acceptable or not. If it's low, between 0 and 1 is low. 3 and 4 is medium, and then 4 and 5 is high risk. Forget it. It's not good. It has to be attended to immediately. Making sure that from Moderate risk, you take in the cost implication. You can even put in a temporary measure before a permanent measure, but don't let it remain as it is, or it could harm people at the workplace, or even visitors who come to interact with the workplace. Okay, then you select the appropriate control measures. Exactly, are you going to put a guardrail to protect the machines from people using it? Are you going to use yellow markings? Are you going to indicate where green should be, where blue should be? Blue means what? Mandatory, you could go. You have to follow mandatory, what it says. Green means what? You are fine to go. Yellow means it's caution, caution, caution. Yellow is caution. Red means no. Don't attempt it at all. That red. Okay. Some people think red is always loud. Red can also mean no, don't attempt it. Okay. Then you record the assessment process. That's the manual that you recorded. Then you review the assessment. That's the 7th step. So those are the 7-step approach method. Okay. When you design the risk assessment, you mentioned, if you remember, the first one is to generate an inventory. So you see it on the board, the hazards and the explanations. Slips and falls, you have to indicate what are the explanation. 1/3 of the users get injury when they pass that particular spot. Could be there. It could be ejection of what? Materials. When materials just eject at the workplace like that, boom. I mean, they just eject, boom. Then you can eject and hit your eye, something. So do you have a goggle? So PPEs are also important. So those are some of the issues. Then working on heights, you fall. Then pressure is also another. So those are also various forms that you could look at the 7-step approach. In our process, I mentioned various types of risk. You remember I mentioned low risk, high risk, medium risk. Okay. So in our computation of risk, means what? You watch on the screen, our computation of risk, we say likelihood times severity. That is the quantitative measure. So if the risk is low risk, it will only come out provided you multiply likelihood times severity. The likelihood of harm being occurring could be low, it could be medium, it could be high. If it's high, the likelihood is high. Then you multiply it by what? The severity. If the severity can be catastrophic, then it means that if the severity is low, minimum, or medium, well, if the severity is low, so if it's low severity and low likelihood, you do nothing. If it is medium, if you multiply the severity and the likelihood and the result is a medium score, then of course you know what to do. You attend to it. But you could put a temporary measure if the finances are not there for the organization, but the finances are there, immediately you put it in. But if likelihood and severity result in something very high, the result very high, say 20 to 25%, because the likelihood you can rate between 1 and 5, and then the severity between 1 and 5, or 0 and 5, then 0 and 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So let's say you use the workplace and then someone slipped and then fell and had a dislocation at the backside, and since then he's gone to the hospital and then he's temporarily disabled. It tells you that when it was measured, the likelihood may have been 3, and then the severity may have been 3. So it's 3 times 3, that is 9. So it tends to be what? Moderate. But if it's 3 times 5, it's 15. That's very high. See, those are some of so it means that particular spot, they have to make sure it's always dry and clean, or they put an indication and barricade it so that nobody passes that particular spot. Then they design an alternative route for everyone to use. All right. So that's just one part of it. If it is 0, if likelihood is 0, that means that there's nothing going to happen. So if you multiply 0 by anything, it's 0. 0 itself is a quantity that cannot be ignored, because, for an instance, if 0 degrees Celsius is measured, it is warmer than -5 degrees Celsius. So 0 is a quantity. So some risk managers think that rating the likelihood should be from 0 to 5, then the severity should be from 0 to 5, means 0, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. But when you multiply the two, you get a response. When you when you multiply between what on the screen you see in 0, 1, and 2 on likelihood, multiply by 0, 1, and 2 on the severity, the maximum you get is 2 times 2 is 4. So that you don't need to do anything because the risk is low. When you multiply the severity and the likelihood is low, or the likelihood and the severity, 2 by 2 is 4. 2 times 2 is 4, so we do nothing. But if you start recording between 5 and 9, that means the risk is what? Worth looking at. But you don't have to do much. You could look at the financial implication. If the organization thinks that the financial implication is too high, it will do nothing, but it will find alternative way around it. For an instance, putting a guardrail. If the guardrail is going to be expensive, they can put a blockade. Okay. Are the machineries with caution notes? Those are issues that you also be looking at. So if the likelihood is say 3, between 9 and 15, 3, and severity likelihood is 3 or 4, and severity is 3 or 4, you can get to 16 or 12. When you have 16 or 12, then it means that action must be taken, then you have to spend. But the organization may have the opportunity to put in a temporary measure so that it doesn't spend too much because it's cost implication for organizations. When it is 2025 between likelihood and then the risk is measured as 2025, that is 4 and 5. 4, 4, and 5. Likelihood 4, severity 4. Likelihood 5 or severity 5. Any of the metrics, then it means that it's severe, it's catastrophic. You have to act. You have to correct it, put it in control measures. All right. So those are some of the issues that we deliberating upon. There are various terminologies being used, but none of the terminologies is permanent. The organization will have to pick one that is suitable, and it has to be within the national regulations. Always make sure that the assessment is within the national regulations that in the jurisdiction that you're operating on. What is the health and safety regulations that you're operating on in the country? Make sure that the organization attains the minimum risk, just the minimum risk. So let's take a break and back, please.
It's Codex Beats.
Check. They say 9 time, he dey sleep. She be young woman, he no go fit.
Yeah, welcome back to the tech segment. We're dealing with risk assessment. We've talked about the type of, we've explained what risk is and then how it can be measured. We've looked at the types of risk. We look at the 5-step approach and the 7-step approach. We look at the quantitative measurement of risk actually, and then the numbers the implications of the numbers and what we should do. What we should do are the control measures. First and foremost, when a risk assessor does the risk assessment, the organization would have to sit down as a team with the external assessor, most importantly, health and safety experts from the health and safety profession will sit with the organization's team and look at the numbers or look at the descriptions, the descriptive. If the descriptive or the descriptions are say severe or catastrophic, then you have to act. If it's moderate, you have to act, but not as emergency as you would have acted if it is critical or catastrophic. If it's low risk, you do nothing. You just let it go. You have to accept some low risk. In life, it's what it is. It is what it is. You have to accept some low risk. Okay, so then now we're looking at the control measures. So in that sense, you'd have to ensure that the control measures are this. You have to ensure that the risk at the workplace meets minimum standard. Minimum. It should just be tolerable. It should not be above the minimum, because the moment it goes past the minimum, then action must be taken. So every activity, every event, every place, every item must be below the minimum. That is then acceptable by national standard and the organizational standards. So internally there must be that assessment, and then the external assessor must also assist in this kind of risk assessment for organizations on health and safety. In doing that, there will be several items. There could be residual risk, which also almost always happens, that after the assessment there are residual cases, especially when it happens on the job. It could be a change of a job manual, it could be change of the machinery. So new training has to be done, that the employer has to ensure that they train fresh, or they train anybody who is on a new remit, new machinery, fresh training. new remit, fresh training. If you are hired, before you are hired, you need health and safety training and the procedures, how to use the machinery or the items. You have to be given that health and safety training on that. So the employer has to do all this. It takes us to what are some of the mitigating or the control measures? Are there going to be rails? Are there going to be color identifications, yellow? Are there machinery instructions, caution notes? You have to inspect all of them. Are there PPEs? Are there first aid, eye washes and all that? Are they at the right places? Are they handy? Is it been explained to employees to understand and use when it happens? Have they reported all that? Those are issues that when it comes to control, guardrails, fumes, PPE, personal protective equipment are almost the last of it. It's one of the last that you have to consider. You would have to carry out all the other control measures, provide fencing, guardrails, and all before you come to PPEs. Not that PPEs must not be provided, they must be provided always. But that is considered as when it gets to the minimum point of health and safety for everyone at the workplace. Okay. So then that notwithstanding, we'll then now go to what are the employer's responsibilities. The duty of care of the employer, we normally call it. The employer, one, has to hire people who are competent, capable people to the workplace. Two, the employer has to ensure that he or she or they have put in all the health and safety. They've done an assessment and put in the necessary controls. They have to ensure that workers' compensation must be paid, or workers' liability as an insurance must be carried out, and they must ensure that the workplace is always safe. People are trained before they are hired. Capable people are trained before hired. You don't hire incompetent people to cause harm to other people. Those are some of the employer's duty of care when it comes to health and safety. Then the employee's duty of care is that he or she, who is the employee, must act reasonably, take reasonable care for his own safety or her own safety. He or she must follow the health and safety instructions when using any equipment. Follow it if it's a color, where to walk at the workplace, where not to walk. He or she must be trained and he or she must follow these instructions strictly. Other than that, he or she will bring more trouble to the organization. So employees must also make sure that they protect themselves, put on the PPEs. Then, of course, report any near accident or accident cases. Report and have it logged and attended to properly. So those are the issues that we've come under health and safety and we've discussed. And if you have any question, do not hesitate to just WhatsApp or email me as on the screen. The name is H. Kwame Afaglo. Thank you.